The moment we talk about unconscious bias, we're talking about something that doesn't announce itself, doesn't walk into a room loudly, and doesn't ask permission before it shapes someone's perception. It operates quietly, silently, and often without the person even realizing they're acting on it. In the general's case, the moment he stepped into that courtroom, the bias wasn't just present, it was palpable. Eyes lingered on him a little too long, expressions shifted ever so slightly, and subtle gestures revealed more truth about the environment than any spoken word could. People often assume bias shows up as open hostility, but most of the time, it appears in small, swift judgments that come from deeply rooted stereotypes. In that courtroom, the uniform he wasn't wearing mattered more to them than the rank he held. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the medals, the leadership. They saw skin color, and from that alone came all the assumptions. But here is where the deeper lesson begins, because understanding unconscious bias starts with recognizing how effortlessly the human mind categorizes people. It's a survival mechanism, a shortcut the brain uses to process the world quicker, but in modern society, that shortcut often becomes a trap that leads to unfair treatment. And when the stakes are high, like in a courtroom setting, bias can shift outcomes, damage reputations, and undermine justice. The general observed every micro-expression, every whisper, every movement that signaled what people thought of him before he even opened his mouth. But he didn't react. Instead, he allowed the moment to reveal the truth about the environment. This is the part people often overlook. Recognizing bias isn't just about calling it out, it's about first seeing it clearly, understanding where it comes from, and deciding how to navigate it. The officer's smirk was only one example, but it represented something larger, the quiet confidence of someone who believed he understood exactly who the general was without knowing him at all. That's the danger of unconscious bias, it convinces people they have already read the story before reaching the first chapter. And the general understood that deeply, because throughout his career, he had seen it in boardrooms, briefings, foreign negotiations, and even within his own military units. What makes his story different is how he chose to respond to it. He didn't treat bias as a threat to his identity, because he knew who he was. Instead, he treated it as a lens through which he could gauge the character of those around him. When we observe how unconscious bias shapes first impressions, it becomes clear that those impressions are less about the person being judged and more about the beliefs held by the one doing the judging. The courtroom wasn't reacting to the general, they were reacting to the narrative they had built in their minds long before he arrived. And this is something many people experience in different forms throughout life, walking into a room where assumptions have already been made, where your qualifications, your intelligence, your intentions, or your worth have been silently estimated and subtly ranked. What the general teaches us is not to internalize those estimations. He understood that bias says everything about the system and nothing about him. Still, awareness alone isn't enough, because unconscious bias influences behavior. It shapes how people speak to you, how they listen to you, how they treat you, and how they interpret your reactions. In the courtroom, every move he made was being watched, not with curiosity, but with a quiet expectation that he would behave according to their assumptions. And when he didn't, when he remained composed, confident, and unbothered, the room began to shift, because nothing disrupts bias faster than the reality that contradicts it. To truly understand the weight of unconscious bias, we must acknowledge how deeply it can affect professional environments, especially spaces where authority is meant to be neutral. Courtrooms, in theory, should be free from prejudice, yet they are filled with humans who carry their experiences, fears, and cultural conditioning with them. Those factors influence decisions, even when people believe they are being objective. The general's presence exposed how quickly some individuals revert to their underlying assumptions when faced with someone they don't expect to see in a position of power. His calm observation of their reactions wasn't a sign of passivity, it was a deliberate choice rooted in wisdom. He knew that before addressing the disrespect, he needed to understand the landscape. That's something most people miss. Identifying bias gives you leverage. It gives you the clarity to choose the right moment to respond, the right tone to use, and the right action to take. The general waited not because he was unsure, but because he knew the most powerful responses are the ones delivered after the truth has fully revealed itself. Unconscious bias may shape first impressions, but it does not have to shape outcomes, especially when a person chooses to respond with purpose rather than emotion. Staying calm in the face of direct disrespect is not something that comes naturally to most people. When someone insults you, dismisses you, or reduces your worth based on a stereotype, the instinctive reaction is to defend, confront, or correct. But the general understood something deeper. True strength is not proven in loud responses, it is proven in controlled reactions. In that courtroom, when the officer smirked at him, when whispers moved through the room like a quiet wave, when the energy shifted into something almost mocking, the general didn't flinch. He didn't raise an eyebrow or let a single muscle in his face betray what he felt. His calm wasn't silence, it was strategy. He had learned that in life, especially in environments where people expect you to react emotionally, composure is the most powerful tool you can use. People often confuse calmness with weakness, but in reality, calmness is discipline. It is the awareness that the moment you lose control of yourself, you hand control to the person provoking you. And the general was not a man who gave away control easily. The ability to remain calm under disrespect requires emotional maturity, and emotional maturity is something built through years of facing challenges that test patience, identity, and dignity. The general had seen disrespect before, on deployments, in negotiations, even in moments when his decisions were questioned not because they were wrong, but because of who he was. Through these experiences, he learned that reacting impulsively rarely leads to justice. Instead, it feeds the very narrative people have already built about you. In the courtroom, the eyes waiting to see his reaction were not seeking truth, they were seeking validation of their assumptions. He knew that. So he chose a different route. He let the moment breathe. He let the disrespect expose itself. He allowed every person in the room to reveal their character while he preserved his. This is what separates leaders from followers, the ability to stand in uncomfortable situations without allowing the environment to control their emotions. Remaining calm when someone undermines you does more than protect your dignity, it disrupts the intention behind the disrespect. Most biased behavior is designed to provoke a specific response. It's meant to make the target feel inferior, defensive, or emotional. But when the general stayed composed, he denied them that result. His calmness forced the room to confront the discomfort of their own behavior. It created silence where they expected noise. It created stability where they attempted to shake him. And in that silence, power shifted. Calmness, when used intentionally, becomes a mirror. It reflects the actions of others back at them. That's why the officer eventually looked away. That's why the whispers began to fade. People weren't responding to the general, they were responding to their own guilt, discomfort, or realization that they had underestimated him. His calmness exposed the truth more clearly than any argument could have. Calmness under disrespect is also a form of control that comes from understanding timing. The general knew that responding too early would make it seem like he was reacting emotionally. Responding too late could allow the disrespect to grow. But responding with calm impatience, waiting for the right moment, meant the impact of his eventual action would be undeniable. This is a skill practiced by leaders who have faced pressure in environments far more intense than a courtroom. When you've negotiated during active conflict, when you've commanded troops who depend on your clarity, when you've made decisions where lives are at stake, an officer's smirk becomes insignificant. That doesn't mean it doesn't sting, it means the sting doesn't dictate your response. The general's calmness came from perspective. He knew who he was. He knew what he represented. He knew what he had earned. And he knew that disrespect cannot diminish worth unless you allow it to. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of remaining calm under disrespect is the message it sends to everyone watching. People learn more from a composed reaction than from a heated defense. The general's posture, his silence, his steady breathing, even these small things told a story. They communicated confidence, self-control, and unshakable identity. They signaled that he was not there to prove himself, he was there to reveal the truth of the situation. Calmness shifts the focus from the target of the disrespect to the source of it. It forces people to confront their own unconscious bias, their own unspoken prejudices, their own behavior. And in that courtroom, the general's calmness was not just a reaction, it was a turning point. It set the stage for what he would do next. It allowed him to maintain authority in a room where people tried to strip it from him. It reminded everyone that respect is not demanded, it is demonstrated through behavior that cannot be shaken by ignorance. It showed that dignity held firmly is more powerful than disrespect thrown carelessly. Leadership is often described as a position, a title, or an authority granted by rank, but the truth is far deeper. Leadership is an atmosphere you create the moment you enter a room. It is the energy you bring, the tone you set, and the standard you silently communicate through your presence. In the courtroom, before the general spoke a single word, his leadership began working in the background. Even while being judged unfairly, even while being underestimated, he understood that true leadership is not something others can take from you, it is something that radiates from within. When he walked in, he didn't shrink himself to blend in, nor did he attempt to dominate the space. He simply stood with the confidence and calm that had been crafted through decades of responsibility, discipline, and service. Leadership is not loud, leadership is steady. And his steadiness was the first signal that the environment was about to shift. The moment the officer smirked at him, many people in his position would have responded with anger or confrontation. But the general knew that leadership is not about reacting, it is about choosing the best possible response for the situation. His silence wasn't passive, it was a controlled choice rooted in experience. Leaders know when to speak, and more importantly, they know when not to. That pause, that quiet observation, created a subtle tension in the room. People expected him to react in a predictable way, but when he didn't, they became uncertain. And uncertainty is the first crack in the structure of disrespect. The general had shifted the atmosphere without saying anything. That is what strong leadership looks like, the ability to change a room simply by how you hold yourself. Leadership is also influence, and influence is most powerful when it is not forced. The general's calm presence forced others to reconsider their own behavior. It made them aware of the weight of their actions. The whispers began to fade not because he demanded silence, but because people felt the wrongness of their own assumptions. They felt the contrast between their perception of him and the reality of his composure. Leadership exposes truth without needing to point fingers. It makes people reflect. It makes people uncomfortable in the right way. And in that courtroom, every person who had judged him prematurely began, slowly, to adjust their posture, their tone, their expressions. They were responding to the atmosphere he had created. Then comes another layer of leadership, the ability to rise above personal insult for the sake of a higher purpose. The general wasn't simply thinking about himself. He wasn't just offended as an individual. He understood that his reaction would become a lesson for everyone watching, people who might experience bias but don't yet know how to navigate it, people who hold positions of authority but have never learned how to use it responsibly, people who might mirror his behavior in future moments of pressure. Leaders understand that every moment is an example. Even in a room where respect is denied, a leader chooses to demonstrate the respect they carry within themselves. And that demonstration influences everyone present. Leadership also means holding people accountable without lowering yourself to their level. The general didn't react with anger because anger would validate the worst assumptions in the room. Instead, he let the disrespect unfold fully, letting the officers reveal who they were without interference. Leaders understand that people show more truth through unguarded behavior than through forced explanations. By staying silent at first, he allowed the courtroom to expose its flaws. Only after the truth was visible did he begin shaping the next steps. That is a hallmark of strong leadership, moving only when the timing ensures the greatest impact. Another important dimension of leadership is emotional intelligence, the ability to understand both your own emotions and the emotions of others. The general recognized that the smirk wasn't just disrespect, it was a test. It was an attempt to provoke him, to pull him into an emotional trap. But he also understood the psychology behind it. People who smirk at authority do so because they assume the power lies with them. The general knew the real power lay in his response. By staying calm, he disrupted the officer's confidence. Emotional intelligence allowed him to read the room, understand the motivations behind the disrespect, and prepare the smartest path forward instead of the most immediate one. Leadership becomes most visible in adversity. It's easy to lead when people respect you, follow you, and admire you. But when you walk into a room where people dismiss you, when you face bias that belittles your achievements, that is when leadership truly reveals itself. The general didn't let the environment shrink him. He didn't let assumptions define him. Instead, he anchored himself in the identity he had built over years, a leader who stays composed, observant, and strategic no matter the circumstances. His behavior reset the tone of the entire courtroom. Without raising his voice, without arguing, without forcing anything, he showed every person present that leadership isn't granted, it's lived. And that is why, long before he made the move that shocked everyone, the shift had already begun. His leadership had already shaped the atmosphere, disarmed hostility, and positioned him as the moral anchor in the room. Using influence ethically is one of the rarest and most powerful forms of leadership, especially in moments when you have every reason to retaliate, expose, or humble someone who has underestimated you. The general understood this perfectly. Influence is not about dominance or intimidation, it is about guiding an outcome with integrity, wisdom, and restraint. In that courtroom, he possessed the kind of influence that could shift careers, alter decisions, and change the tone of the entire proceeding with a single call or a single statement. Yet, he didn't rush to use it. That discipline, the ability to pause even when you hold power, is what separates those who seek justice from those who seek revenge. When the officer smirked, when people whispered, when assumptions filled the room, the general recognized that misusing his influence would lower him to the level of those acting on bias. Instead, he waited, choosing to demonstrate that influence, when used ethically, becomes a tool for truth rather than personal satisfaction. Ethical influence begins with clarity of purpose. The general didn't aim to embarrass the officer or silence the courtroom. His goal was to shift the culture of the moment, to confront the injustice in a way that couldn't be dismissed as emotional, confrontational, or reactionary. He understood that the most powerful corrections are those delivered with precision. When a leader restrains their influence until the exact moment it is most needed, the impact becomes unforgettable. The general knew that influence is only ethical when it elevates the situation rather than escalating it. So he allowed the disrespect to unfold long enough for everyone to reveal their character. He didn't rush to defend himself because he didn't need validation. He waited because he wanted the lesson to be undeniable. The interesting thing about influence is that it grows stronger in silence. When someone in power chooses not to react immediately, people begin to sense that something deeper is happening. That quiet confidence creates discomfort for those who assumed they had control. The officer who smirked didn't understand this dynamic. He believed his rank in the courtroom gave him the upper hand. What he didn't realize was that he was dealing with someone who had operated at a far higher level of command, someone who had managed crises, negotiated with international leaders, and led thousands of soldiers through situations far more intense than this. The general's silence was not weakness, it was the reminder that true influence doesn't need to be announced. It reveals itself at the right time. Ethical influence also means understanding the consequences of your actions. The general knew that if he lashed out or used his authority impulsively, the narrative would shift from the officer's disrespect to his own reaction. People would forget what triggered the moment and focus entirely on how he responded. That's how bias often protects itself, by provoking a reaction that can later be used to justify the initial disrespect. The general refused to play into that pattern. Instead, he made sure that when he finally chose to act, there would be no confusion about why. Ethical influence is intentional. It is purposeful. It ensures that when you take action, the truth speaks louder than the emotion. Another crucial part of using influence ethically is protecting the dignity of others, even those who don't offer you the same courtesy. The general understood that humiliating someone rarely leads to growth, it leads to defensiveness. He wanted accountability, not revenge. He wanted awareness, not fear. Leaders who use influence ethically aim to correct the behavior, not destroy the person. That distinction matters. Anyone can punish, but very few can transform. The general's decision-making reflected this mindset. He wasn't trying to prove he was superior, he was trying to demonstrate a standard that others could learn from. Ethical influence lifts the room rather than crushing it. Ethical influence also demands patience, something many people struggle with. The general had the patience to let the situation unfold at its natural pace. He didn't interrupt the judge. He didn't confront the whispering officers. He allowed every person in the room to settle into their assumptions. This patience gave weight to his eventual action. When someone with true influence waits before acting, people notice. They pay attention. They sense that the calm is deliberate. And when the moment arrives, the power behind the action is amplified. Perhaps the most important aspect of ethical influence is that it aligns with values, not emotions. The general's values were rooted in service, respect, discipline, and fairness. He had built his entire career on these principles, and he wasn't going to compromise them just because someone treated him unfairly. Instead, he used the moment to demonstrate those values in action. He wanted the room to understand that influence does not give you permission to act without integrity, it gives you the responsibility to act with even more of it. Ethical influence is a commitment to doing what is right, even when you have every reason to do otherwise. It is leadership in its purest form, guided not by ego, but by purpose. Turning humiliation into a moment of transformation requires a strength that goes beyond confidence or experience. It requires a deep understanding of self-worth, a mastery of emotional control, and the ability to see opportunity where most people would only see insult. When the general faced that quiet wave of disrespect in the courtroom, he didn't just experience a personal slight. He witnessed a system revealing its cracks, its assumptions, and its biases right in front of him. Most people, when humiliated, respond with either immediate anger or internal withdrawal. But the general chose neither. He saw the moment not as an attack to defend against, but as a stage upon which truth was exposing itself. That shift in perspective is the beginning of transformation. Instead of reacting to the humiliation, he allowed it to speak louder than any argument he could make. He let every disrespectful glance, every whispered comment, every sign of prejudice build the foundation for what he would do next. Humiliation becomes transformative only when you refuse to let it define you. The general had spent years building an identity rooted in discipline, leadership, and service. His value wasn't tied to the opinions of people who didn't know him. So even when the courtroom attempted to diminish him, he stayed anchored in who he was. That grounding gave him the strength to observe the situation without being consumed by it. Most people crumble under humiliation because they mistake it for truth. The general understood that humiliation says more about the ones inflicting it than the one receiving it. That clarity allowed him to stand steady and let the moment unfold without losing sight of himself. Transformation requires this kind of resilience, the ability to remain whole even when someone attempts to break your dignity. Another part of turning humiliation into transformation is refusing to respond on the level it was offered. If he had responded with anger, the narrative would have shifted instantly. People would no longer talk about the disrespect shown to him, they would talk about how he reacted. And that is how humiliation traps people. It makes them behave in ways that validate the assumptions of those who judged them. But the general didn't step into that trap. He recognized that his response would shape the meaning of the moment far more than the humiliation itself. By remaining composed, he reclaimed control. He transformed the humiliation from something done to him into something that revealed the character of those around him. Transformation also comes from understanding timing. He knew that reacting immediately would reduce the significance of the lesson. Instead, he waited. He gave the room enough time to expose itself completely. This patience added weight to the truth. People became uncomfortable. They became aware of their own actions. They began to sense that something was shifting. The general was letting the humiliation breathe long enough to become undeniable. When a leader allows a situation to fully reveal itself before addressing it, the result is far more powerful. He waited not because he was powerless, but because he understood the value of strategic timing. And when he eventually responded, it would not look emotional, it would look intentional. Humiliation can also be transformed when the targeted person chooses elevation rather than confrontation. The general refused to match the smallness of the behavior shown toward him. Instead, he carried himself with a dignity that filled the room. His posture, his silence, his controlled breathing, everything communicated that he was not moved by the attempts to belittle him. This behavior forced everyone in the courtroom to confront the contrast between his composure and their disrespect. Transformation happens when you rise above a moment so completely that others are forced to rise with you or expose themselves for refusing to. That contrast becomes its own form of accountability. But the most powerful aspect of transforming humiliation is recognizing the opportunity it offers. Humiliation, when handled with wisdom, can become a turning point that reshapes perceptions, challenges assumptions, and teaches lessons that words alone could never deliver. The general realized that the officers in the courtroom weren't just disrespecting him, they were revealing a mindset that needed to be confronted. He saw the moment as a chance to shift something deeper than a single interaction. He wanted to correct not just the behavior, but the belief system behind it. By transforming his own experience of humiliation, he opened the door for the environment around him to transform as well. Finally, transformation requires intention. The general didn't let the moment pass without meaning. He didn't ignore it, and he didn't retaliate. Instead, he prepared himself to act in a way that would leave a lasting impact, an action that would quiet the room, reset the atmosphere, and force every person present to rethink their assumptions. The humiliation became fuel for a larger purpose. It strengthened his resolve. It sharpened his awareness. It positioned him to deliver a response that would not only reclaim his dignity but elevate the entire moment. Such transformation is not about revenge. It is about turning the weight of humiliation into a platform for clarity, accountability, and change. Courageous composure is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. People often imagine courage as loud, explosive, or confrontational, but in reality, some of the bravest moments in life happen in complete silence. In that courtroom, when the general stood in front of people who judged him before he even spoke, his courage didn't come from anger, force, or authority. It came from his ability to remain composed when every part of the environment tried to strip that composure away. Courageous composure is the decision to hold steady when you have every reason to lose control. It is the discipline to protect your dignity even when others refuse to offer you any. And it is the awareness that reacting emotionally may feel satisfying, but responding with purpose is far more powerful. The general's composure came from a lifetime of facing situations where panic or anger could cost lives. When you've led soldiers through uncertainty, navigated crises with the world watching, and carried the weight of responsibility that stretches far beyond your own safety, small moments of disrespect cannot shake you. That doesn't mean the disrespect doesn't hurt, it means it doesn't direct your behavior. Courageous composure is not about ignoring emotions, it is about mastering them. The general didn't suppress his feelings, he understood them, controlled them, and chose the best response despite them. This level of composure requires emotional intelligence, mental discipline, and a clear understanding of what truly matters in each moment. One of the reasons courageous composure inspires people is because it disrupts the expectations of those who try to provoke you. People who rely on bias or disrespect expect to control the emotional tone of the situation. They expect anger. They expect defensiveness. They expect you to react in ways that make their behavior seem justified. But when the general stayed composed, he challenged their expectations. His calmness made the disrespect more visible. It revealed the immaturity and unprofessionalism of those who acted on bias. His silence became a spotlight, exposing the reality of the moment without him having to say a word. That is the power of courageous composure, it turns the behavior of others into its own indictment. Courageous composure is also a form of protection. It protects your credibility. It protects your ability to navigate the situation with precision. It ensures that when you finally choose to act, people cannot misinterpret your intention. In the courtroom, the general knew that if he responded too quickly, the narrative would shift. Instead of addressing the injustice, people would focus on him. Composure allowed him to maintain the moral high ground. It ensured that when he moved, the spotlight remained exactly where it needed to be, on the behavior that needed correcting. Leaders understand that credibility is built not through perfection but through steadiness in critical moments. The general's composure preserved his credibility and gave him the leverage he needed to respond effectively. Another powerful aspect of courageous composure is its ability to influence the energy of a room. Energy is contagious. Panic spreads quickly. So does anger. But so does calmness. When the general stood tall, unshaken, and fully present, the room began to shift. The whispers softened. The mocking expressions faded. Even the officer who smirked began to feel the weight of the moment. Composure radiates strength in a way that words cannot. It communicates confidence, authority, and unshakable identity. When one person refuses to be moved by disrespect, others feel compelled to adjust their own behavior. This is how courageous composure becomes a quiet form of leadership. It creates a standard through example rather than demand. Courageous composure is also tied to purpose. The general wasn't just thinking about himself. He knew that every reaction he chose would reflect not only on him but on the countless people who face similar bias without the rank or recognition he carried. That awareness gave him even greater motivation to respond with intention. His composure wasn't about appearing strong, it was about being strong for those who needed the example. Real courage is never self-centered. It elevates others. It carves a path for people who may one day face the same obstacles. By staying composed, the general showed that dignity can withstand prejudice, that strength does not require aggression, and that silence can be more commanding than shouting. Courageous composure becomes even more meaningful when paired with action. It is not the absence of reaction, it is the strategic preparation for the right reaction. The general's calm stance was not the end of the story, it was the foundation for what he would do next. Composure created clarity. It allowed him to fully observe the room, understand the dynamics, and choose the response that would have the greatest impact. Courageous composure is courage with direction, strength with purpose, and confidence with patience. It is the steady breath before the decisive action. It is the moment where a leader gathers their power, not to retaliate, but to transform the situation. This is why courageous composure inspires lasting change. When people witness someone rise above disrespect with unwavering dignity, they remember it. It challenges their assumptions. It reshapes their understanding of strength. The general's composure in that courtroom didn't just set the tone for his next move, it set a standard for everyone watching. It taught that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to remain calm when others expect you to crumble. It showed that courage is not always loud. Sometimes, courage is a steady posture, a quiet breath, and an unshakable belief in who you are.